Mia walked down the familiar city streets, her steps heavy with the weight of her worries. It was a cold morning, and the winter chill bit at her skin through her thin coat. The city was alive with its usual hustle, people rushing past her, heads down, caught up in their own lives. As she passed by shop windows and street vendors, her mind swirled with thoughts of rejection emails, overdue bills, and the daunting question of what her future held. For months, Mia had been trying to find a job. As a trained nurse, she had once been proud of her ability to care for others, but after being laid off due to budget cuts at the hospital, she found herself spiraling. Despite her best efforts, no hospital or clinic seemed to be hiring. Each application sent felt like a lifeline cast into an endless void, with no response to pull her out of her growing desperation. As she turned the corner by the small coffee shop she often passed, her eyes caught sight of an elderly man huddled on the sidewalk. His thin, frail body was wrapped in layers of tattered blankets, his head bowed low as he shivered in the cold. The sight stopped her in her tracks. Mia had seen beggars before, many in fact during her walks through the city, but something about this man's vulnerability stirred a deep empathy within her. His hollow eyes, barely visible beneath the brim of his worn hat, told a story of hardship, loss, and survival. Without thinking twice, Mia stepped into the coffee shop, her mind already made up. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the bitter cold outside, and as she approached the counter, she ordered 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for the man outside. It wasn't much, she knew, but it was all she could offer. The barista handed her the steaming cups, and Mia quickly made her way back outside. As she approached the elderly man, she felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. She didn't want to offend him, but she couldn't bear the thought of walking away without doing something to help. She knelt down beside him, holding out the cup of coffee with a gentle smile. "Here," she said softly. "I thought you might need something to warm you up." The man looked up, his weary eyes widening in surprise as he focused on the cup in her hand. For a moment, he hesitated, as if unsure whether to accept the gift. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out and took the cup, his fingers brushing against hers. Mia could feel the coldness of his skin, the chill of the streets that clung to him like a shadow. "Thank you," the man rasped, his voice hoarse from the cold and lack of use. He took a small sip, and Mia could see the gratitude in his eyes as the warmth of the coffee began to spread through him. It was a simple thing, really, just a cup of coffee, but in that moment, it meant the world to him. "You're welcome," Mia replied, still smiling. "It's a cold day out here." They sat there for a few moments in silence. Mia crouched beside him as the bustling city moved around them, unaware of the quiet exchange. She could feel the weight of his hardship in the air, the unspoken stories of how he had come to be on the streets. She didn't pry, didn't ask any questions. She simply offered him the small kindness she had, knowing that sometimes that was all a person needed. The man, who introduced himself as Charles, was clearly not used to such gestures. Most people passed by without even looking at him, their eyes averted as if his existence was something to be ignored. But Mia had stopped. She had seen him, and for that, he was grateful. They exchanged a few words, nothing too deep, just simple pleasantries about the weather and the city. But in those few minutes, Mia could feel a connection, a shared understanding of struggle and survival. She didn't know his full story, and he didn't know hers, but there was a quiet respect between them, born from the recognition of each other's humanity. As Mia stood to leave, she gave him one last smile. "Take care of yourself, okay?" she said. Charles nodded, clutching the coffee cup as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "You too," he replied, his voice still soft but filled with sincerity. Mia walked away, her heart feeling a little lighter. The weight of her own struggles hadn't disappeared, but in that moment, she had been reminded of something important, that even in her darkest times, she still had the power to bring light to someone else's day. The act of giving, however small, had given her a sense of purpose that she had been missing. As she continued her walk, the encounter stayed with her. She couldn't shake the image of Charles sitting on the cold sidewalk, clutching the cup of coffee with his trembling hands. He had so little, yet he had thanked her with such genuine gratitude, as if she had given him the world. Mia had no idea how this small, simple gesture would come back to her in ways she could never have imagined. For now, all she knew was that she had done the right thing, and sometimes that was enough. That night, as she lay in bed, the image of the beggar stayed in her mind. She wondered about his life, about how he had ended up on the streets. She hoped that wherever he was safe and warm. Little did she know this fleeting moment of kindness had set something much larger in motion, something that would soon change her life forever. And so, as the night drew on, Mia slept, unaware of the luxury car that would be waiting for her the next morning. Mia unlocked the door to her small apartment and stepped inside, greeted by the familiar quiet that seemed to engulf her every time she came home. The walls were bare except for a few framed photos, memories from a time when her life felt stable, predictable, and full of hope. Now it felt as though the weight of the world had found a home here, pressing down on her shoulders the moment she entered. The chill of the winter air still clung to her skin, and she rubbed her hands together for warmth as she shrugged off her coat. Her apartment was modest, small, with just enough space for the basics. The couch she had bought secondhand sagged in the middle, and the table in the corner wobbled if you put too much weight on it. The light above her flickered slightly, adding to the sense of fragility that seemed to define her world these days. She walked over to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Inside, a few sad leftovers and a half-empty carton of milk stared back at her. Mia sighed. Grocery shopping would have to wait. Money was tight, tighter than it had ever been. Every day felt like a balancing act, trying to make what little she had stretch until she found a way out of this financial storm. She closed the fridge door and sat down at the small table, her mind racing with thoughts that refused to quiet. The stack of unopened bills sat in the corner, each envelope a reminder of the looming responsibilities she could no longer afford to ignore. Rent was due in a week, and she hadn't paid the last electric bill. She could feel the pressure building, an invisible clock ticking down, threatening to run out before she found a solution. For months now, Mia had been searching for work, anything to get her back on her feet. Nursing had been her passion for as long as she could remember. Caring for others had always given her a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going, even when times were tough. But ever since she'd been laid off from her position at the hospital, everything had spiraled. The job market wasn't kind to someone in her position, and every rejection email hit her harder than the last. She leaned back in the chair, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the overwhelming thoughts of unpaid bills and job applications that never led anywhere. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the suffocating sense of uncertainty that followed her everywhere. Her mind wandered back to the beggar she had met earlier that day. She couldn't help but reflect on how their lives, while so different on the surface, felt oddly parallel. Like her, he was trapped in a situation that seemed impossible to escape, facing the world with little more than the hope that tomorrow might bring something better. For a moment, she wondered what had led him to the streets. What series of unfortunate events had put him there, just as her job loss had led her to the financial struggles she now faced. She thought of his trembling hands as he accepted the coffee, the way his eyes had lit up with surprise and gratitude at such a simple gesture. It had been nothing more than a cup of coffee, really, something she had barely thought about when she bought it. And yet, in that moment, it had felt like the most meaningful thing she could do. Mia stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out over the city below. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the snow-covered pavement, and she could see people rushing to and fro, bundled in their coats, heads down against the cold wind. Somewhere out there, Charles, the elderly beggar, was likely still huddled in his corner, trying to survive another night on the streets. The thought weighed on her heart, and she couldn't shake the feeling of how fragile everything in life truly was. Despite her own troubles, she had found comfort in that small act of kindness. She had nothing to give, nothing of material value at least, but she had given him her time, her warmth, and a moment of connection. And somehow, in doing that, she had also given herself a brief reprieve from the overwhelming stress of her own life. Mia let out a long breath, fogging up the window as she pressed her forehead against the cold glass. What was it about helping others that made her feel so alive, even when her own life was crumbling around her? She had always believed that nursing was more than just a career. It was her calling. Caring for people wasn't something she did because it was her job. It was who she was at her core. That's why it hurt so much to be without work, to feel as though she was no longer able to do the one thing that gave her life meaning. As she stood there staring out into the night, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection to Charles. His circumstances reminded her that no matter how dire her own situation seemed, others were suffering too, perhaps even more than she was. And yet, despite the uncertainty and hardship in her life, she had managed to make a small difference in someone else's. But that didn't change the fact that her future was a giant question mark. The uncertainty weighed heavily on her. What would happen if she couldn't find a job soon? Would she lose the apartment? Would she end up like Charles, relying on the kindness of strangers to survive? She shook her head, trying to push those thoughts away. She couldn't allow herself to spiral into despair. Not yet. There was still time to turn things around, still a chance that the right opportunity might come along. She just had to keep believing that things would get better, even if it didn't feel like it right now. Sitting back down at the table, she pulled out her laptop and began scrolling through job listings once again. It had become a nightly routine, one filled with disappointment more often than not. But she couldn't afford to stop looking. She needed something, anything that would get her back on her feet. Hours passed as she applied to job after job, her eyes growing heavy with exhaustion. The weight of uncertainty continued to press down on her, but there was a small spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow might bring something new. As she finally closed her laptop and crawled into bed, Mia thought once more of the beggar she had helped that morning. She had brightened his day, if only for a moment. And maybe, just maybe, something good would come back her way. After all, kindness had a way of coming full circle, didn't it? Little did she know that small act of kindness had already set something in motion, something bigger than she could have ever imagined. As she drifted off to sleep, she had no idea that tomorrow would be the day her life would change forever, in ways she could never have predicted. Mia woke up the next morning to the soft glow of early sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her apartment. She rubbed her eyes, still groggy from the restless night. Her mind had been racing ever since she drifted off, filled with worries about her uncertain future. Her usual routine of checking her phone for emails had become an automatic action, a mixture of hope and dread settling in as she swiped through her notifications. Nothing. Just more rejection letters, advertisements, and bills. She sighed, swinging her legs out of bed and heading towards the bathroom. The sound of water running through the pipes echoed in the quiet apartment as she splashed her face, trying to shake off the lingering fatigue. With each passing day, it became harder and harder to motivate herself to face the world. How much longer could she keep going like this, applying for jobs she'd never hear back from, living paycheck to paycheck without a real paycheck in sight? As she went through the motions of her morning routine, she couldn't stop thinking about the old beggar, Charles. His kind, weathered face stayed with her, a reminder that even when things seemed bleak, there were others facing even greater struggles. Yet in that moment, when she had given him the cup of coffee, she hadn't felt like the one in need. It had been a brief reprieve from her worries, a chance to help someone else, if only for a fleeting moment. She grabbed her jacket, ready to step out into the cold morning air for another round of job applications and errands. But just as she reached for the doorknob, she paused, hearing an unfamiliar sound outside her window. The low hum of a car engine, steady and persistent, filled the silence of the street below. It wasn't unusual for cars to pass by her building, but something about this one seemed different. She glanced through the window and her eyes widened. A sleek black luxury car, polished to a mirror-like shine, sat parked right in front of her building. The vehicle stood out against the gritty, worn-down surroundings of the neighborhood like something out of a different world. Its tinted windows reflected the early morning light, giving it an air of mystery and importance. Mia blinked, unsure if she was seeing things. What was a car like that doing here, in this part of town? Before she could make sense of it, the driver's side door opened and a sharply dressed man stepped out. He was tall and formal, wearing a crisp black suit that matched the car. His posture was straight, and he moved with a kind of calm confidence that seemed at odds with the modest, run-down building she called home. Mia's heart raced as she watched him walk toward the entrance. The thud of his polished shoes against the pavement echoed in her ears, growing louder with each step. Instinctively, she stepped back from the window, unsure of what to do. Why was he here? What could he possibly want? The doorbell buzzed, jolting her out of her thoughts. For a moment, she froze, staring at the door as though it had come to life. She didn't know anyone who would be arriving in a car like that, especially not this early in the morning. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them making any sense. Was this a mistake? Had someone sent him to the wrong address? Taking a deep breath, she opened the door cautiously. The man from the car stood before her, his expression polite but unreadable. Up close, he looked even more out of place in the worn-out corridor of her building, with its peeling paint and creaky floors. His suit was perfectly tailored, and his shoes gleamed like they had just been polished. He smiled warmly, though there was a professional distance in his demeanor. "Good morning, Miss Matthews?" His voice was smooth, almost soothing, as though he had done this many times before. Mia hesitated, nodding slowly. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" The man's smile widened slightly. "I've been sent to escort you. My employer wishes to speak with you." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "Your employer? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Who sent you?" "I'm afraid I can't disclose much here," he replied, his tone remaining gentle but firm. "However, I assure you that this is a legitimate and sincere request. You're not in any trouble, Miss Matthews. Quite the opposite, in fact." Mia's mind was spinning. She had no idea what was going on, but the man's calm demeanor somehow put her at ease, even though the situation was beyond bizarre. A luxury car sent for her? Someone wanting to speak with her? It sounded like something out of a dream, or a prank. She couldn't think of anyone who would go to such lengths to get her attention, and certainly not anyone who owned a car like that. "I don't understand," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "Why would someone want to speak with me? I don't know anyone who could afford something like this." The man offered a reassuring nod. "I understand your confusion, Miss Matthews. All I can say is that it's regarding a matter of kindness you extended recently. You'll understand more once we arrive." The words hung in the air, sending a shiver down Mia's spine. A matter of kindness? The only thing that came to mind was the coffee she had bought for Charles the day before. But that couldn't possibly be connected, could it? How could a simple cup of coffee lead to something like this? She hesitated, looking past the man toward the car. The entire situation felt surreal, but her curiosity was piqued. Whoever had sent this man clearly knew something about her, and if it was related to her gesture of kindness, maybe there was more to it than she had realized. She couldn't help but wonder if this was some elaborate setup for a job offer. Perhaps a wealthy person had taken notice of her kindness and was now offering her a way out of her financial troubles. It seemed far-fetched, but then again, so did everything about this moment. After a few seconds of internal debate, Mia nodded. "Okay, I'll come with you." The driver's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle air of approval in his nod. "Very good, Miss Matthews. Right this way." She followed him down the narrow stairs of her building, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her thoughts raced, trying to piece together the puzzle of why someone would go to such lengths to reach her. As they approached the car, the driver opened the back door for her, motioning for her to step inside. Mia slid into the plush leather seat, the interior of the car more luxurious than anything she had ever experienced. The scent of fine leather and a faint hint of cologne filled the air as the door closed behind her, sealing her in a world far removed from her humble apartment. The driver got in, and the engine purred to life. As the car glided smoothly down the street, Mia stared out the window, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea where they were going or who was waiting for her, but one thing was certain. Her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. And it all began with a cup of coffee. The luxury car weaved through winding roads lined with towering trees as Mia sat in the back seat, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. She watched the scenery blur past, still trying to make sense of the morning's events. The car's smooth ride and opulent interior only added to the surreal feeling that had enveloped her ever since she stepped inside. It felt like something out of a movie, a bizarre, almost dreamlike scenario that she couldn't fully grasp. She was just an unemployed nurse struggling to make ends meet, Yet here she was, being driven to some mysterious destination by a chauffeur in a black suit. Her mind raced with questions, none of which she had answers to. The driver hadn't spoken much during the trip, but his calm professionalism kept her from feeling completely lost. As they passed through a set of large wrought iron gates, Mia felt her breath catch in her throat. They had arrived at what looked like a grand estate, the kind she had only ever seen in magazines or movies. The driveway was lined with perfectly manicured hedges, and the sprawling mansion ahead of them loomed like a palace, its stone facade gleaming in the midday sun. It was an image of opulence she had never been close to in her life. Mia blinked, feeling more out of place with every second that passed. She was in a simple coat and worn-out shoes, the kind of clothes that spoke to her months of unemployment and financial strain. Yet here she was, pulling up to an estate so lavish, she couldn't even imagine the kind of wealth it must have taken to build and maintain it. The car came to a smooth stop in front of the mansion's grand entrance, where marble steps led up to enormous double doors, adorned with intricate carvings. Mia stared at the building in awe, her hands trembling slightly. Her nerves were on edge, a knot forming in her stomach. Was this real? What was she doing here? She had been expecting a modest house, or perhaps even an office, where someone might offer her a small job. Instead, she had been brought to this mansion, a place fit for royalty. She swallowed hard as the driver stepped out of the car, walking around to open the door for her. "Miss Matthews, we've arrived," he said, his voice calm and composed. Mia hesitated for a moment, staring at the mansion's imposing doors, before she took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The crisp air hit her face, and she felt a shiver run down her spine as she looked around the grand estate. Everything was so meticulously maintained: the gardens, the fountain in the courtyard, the perfectly trimmed hedges. It was clear that whoever owned this place lived a life far removed from her own. As the driver led her up the marble steps, Mia's heart raced. She felt an overwhelming sense of uncertainty, as though her very presence here was a mistake. Surely this wasn't meant for her, but the driver's quiet assurance gave her just enough courage to keep moving forward. When they reached the top of the steps, the large doors opened with a soft creak, revealing an elegant foyer beyond. The air inside smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh flowers, and the floor beneath her feet was made of gleaming marble. Standing just inside the doorway was a man, tall and well-dressed in a tailored suit. But it wasn't the elegance of his attire that caught Mia's attention. It was his face. She gasped, her eyes widening in shock. It was the beggar she had helped the day before. There was no mistaking it. His face, though now clean-shaven and polished, was the same weathered face she had seen sitting on the street corner, shivering in the cold. Mia's breath caught in her throat as she stared at him. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The man smiled gently, his eyes warm and kind, yet filled with a hint of mischief, as if he had been waiting for this moment of revelation. "Mia, I know this must be overwhelming for you," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Please, come inside. I'll explain everything." Still in shock, Mia nodded numbly and followed him into the grand foyer. The sheer scale of the mansion left her speechless. High ceilings, sparkling chandeliers, and walls adorned with artwork that looked as though they belonged in a museum. Everything was pristine, every surface gleaming under the soft light. She felt like she had stepped into a different world. The man led her to a sitting room, where plush velvet couches and armchairs were arranged around a marble fireplace. The warmth of the fire crackled gently, casting a soft glow over the room. Mia sat down on the edge of one of the couches, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, still trying to process what was happening. She glanced up at the man, who now seemed to stand before her, not as a beggar, but as someone of immense wealth and power. After a moment of silence, the man finally spoke. "You must be wondering what's going on," he said, his voice filled with understanding. "I owe you an explanation, and I promise to tell you everything." Mia nodded, still too stunned to speak. "My name is Charles Montgomery," he began, "and as you've probably guessed by now, I'm not really a beggar. I'm a businessman, a rather successful one, in fact. But what you didn't know when you met me yesterday was that I've been searching for someone who would show genuine kindness, even when they had little to give. Mia's brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why were you pretending to be a beggar? Why would someone like you do that?" Charles smiled, his expression thoughtful. "For years, I've watched people pass by those less fortunate. Most ignore them. Some offer a quick coin or two, but very few stop to truly see them. To offer something meaningful, something that comes from the heart. I wanted to find someone who would show compassion without expecting anything in return." Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to him. The memory of their brief encounter yesterday flooded back. How she had felt compelled to help him, to offer him something warm on that cold morning. It had seemed so simple at the time, just a small act of kindness. But now, hearing Charles explain his intentions, she realized that moment had been far more significant than she had ever imagined. You were testing me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Charles nodded. "In a way, yes. I've been doing this for a while, observing people from different walks of life. Many are too wrapped up in their own struggles to see those around them. But you, Mia, you stopped. You bought me that cup of coffee, even though you're going through so much yourself. You didn't have much, but you gave what you could." Mia's eyes welled up with tears as she thought back to her struggles, the endless job rejections, the bills she couldn't pay, the uncertainty of her future. She had felt so powerless, so lost. Yet in that moment with Charles, she had acted on pure instinct, driven by empathy. "I didn't do it for anything in return," she whispered, her voice trembling. I just wanted to help. "And that's exactly why I chose you," Charles said, his eyes shining with admiration. "Your kindness wasn't about what you could gain. It was about what you could give, even when you had so little." Mia blinked, her mind racing to keep up with everything he was saying. "But why? Why am I here? What do you want from me?" Charles' smile softened. "I don't want anything from you, Mia. I want to give you an opportunity. I've been searching for someone like you to help, someone who deserves a chance to turn their life around. I'm offering you a job, an important one. I want you to be my personal nurse. The position comes with a generous salary, full benefits, and the security you've been searching for." Mia's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. A job? Not just any job, but a secure, well-paying position as a personal nurse to a wealthy businessman? It felt like a dream. Too good to be true. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her hands trembling. "I never expected. You don't have to decide right now," Charles said gently. "Take your time. I just wanted to give you this opportunity because you deserve it. You've already shown me who you are, a person of deep compassion and integrity. This is my way of saying thank you." Mia sat in stunned silence, her mind spinning with emotion. She had spent months searching for a job, any job, and now, out of nowhere, this incredible opportunity had landed in her lap, all because of a simple cup of coffee. The morning sun filtered through the large windows of Mia's new apartment, casting a warm glow across the sleek furniture and polished hardwood floors. She stood by the kitchen counter, savoring a moment of stillness, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. It had been only a few weeks since her life had taken a dramatic turn, but everything already felt so different, almost like a dream she was still afraid to wake up from. Mia's journey from unemployment and uncertainty to this new life as Charles Montgomery's personal nurse had been nothing short of miraculous. Just a few short weeks ago, she had been standing in the cold, buying a cup of coffee for a man she thought was a beggar. Now, that same man, revealed as a wealthy businessman, had not only given her a job, but had transformed her entire life. The spacious apartment she now called home was a far cry from the cramped, run-down place she had struggled to afford before. Everything about her new reality felt surreal, and yet it was real. As she sipped her coffee, Mia's thoughts drifted back to that fateful day. Her mind played through the moment she had handed the cup of coffee to Charles, thinking nothing of it but the warmth she hoped it would bring him. She had never expected anything in return, never dreamed that her small act of kindness would ripple into something so grand. It amazed her how much could change from a single gesture, how an act of compassion so simple and seemingly insignificant, could alter the course of her life in such an extraordinary way. The sound of her phone vibrating on the counter pulled Mia from her reverie. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Charles. "Good morning, Mia. I'll be in the study for most of the morning, but take your time settling in. Don't forget, your health and well-being come first. Always." Mia smiled softly as she read the message. Charles had been more than just an employer to her. He had been a mentor, a guiding force who had not only given her the financial stability she so desperately needed, but had also taken a genuine interest in her personal growth. His kindness and generosity seemed boundless, and for the first time in months, Mia felt as though she had a future filled with hope and possibility. Finishing her coffee, she set the cup down and made her way to the mirror by the front door. Dressed in her new work uniform, a clean and professional nursing outfit, she looked at herself for a moment, taking in the change. Gone was the worry in her eyes, the fatigue etched into her face from sleepless nights filled with anxiety over her unpaid bills and uncertain future. In its place was a quiet confidence, a newfound sense of purpose that had begun to take root within her. She smiled at her reflection, grateful beyond words for the opportunities she had been given. Today marked the beginning of her new job as Charles's personal nurse, but it was more than just a role for her. It was a chance to reclaim her life, to find meaning in her work again, and to build something better for herself. With a deep breath, Mia left her apartment and made her way to the mansion, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The ride to Charles's estate was peaceful, the familiar winding roads now a part of her daily commute. When she arrived, the staff greeted her warmly, and Mia felt a sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. She walked through the grand entrance, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors, and made her way to Charles's study, where he was waiting for her. The room was spacious, with bookshelves lining the walls and large windows that overlooked the lush gardens outside. Charles sat at his desk, engrossed in paperwork, but as soon as Mia entered, he looked up and greeted her with a smile. "Mia, good morning," he said, standing to shake her hand. "I hope you're settling in well. If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to let me know." "I'm settling in wonderfully, thank you," Mia replied, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I still can't believe how much my life has changed." Charles smiled, his eyes full of understanding. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve every bit of it. But this is just the beginning, Mia. I didn't hire you only to be my nurse. I hired you because I see potential in you. You're compassionate, intelligent, and hardworking. You have the ability to make a difference, and I want to help you grow." Mia blinked in surprise, her heart racing with excitement and gratitude. "I don't know what to say. You've already done so much for me." Charles waved his hand dismissively. "It's not about what I've done. It's about what you can do. I know you've been through difficult times, but those experiences have shaped you into someone remarkable. I want to support you in becoming the best version of yourself." He stood and walked over to the large window, gazing out at the estate. "I've spent years building this fortune, but what's the point of wealth if it's not used for good? I want to invest in people who care, people like you, who have a genuine desire to help others. That's why I hired you, Mia, not just to take care of me, but to fulfill your own dreams too." Mia was speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his words. It was as though the universe had aligned, placing her in this very moment for a reason. Charles wasn't just offering her a job, he was offering her the chance to change her life in ways she had never thought possible. "I don't even know where to begin," Mia said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I've always wanted to do more, to help people, but I never had the resources." Charles turned to her, his expression gentle. "Well, now you do, and I want to help you every step of the way." He walked back to his desk and handed her a small folder. "Inside this folder are resources for continuing your education. I know you've always wanted to further your nursing career, and I'm going to make sure you can. There's a scholarship fund I've set up in your name. You won't have to worry about tuition or costs. All I ask is that you continue to live with the same compassion and integrity that brought you here." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes as she accepted the folder. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Charles was offering her the opportunity not only to work as his personal nurse, but also to continue her education, to build the career she had always dreamed of. It was everything she had hoped for, and more. "Thank you," Mia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll never be able to repay you for this." Charles smiled warmly. "You've already repaid me, Mia. You showed me that there are still good people in the world, people who care, even when they have little to give. That's worth more than all the money in the world." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity and growth for Mia. She quickly settled into her role as Charles's nurse, caring for him with the same compassion and dedication she had shown in her previous jobs. But beyond that, she began to immerse herself in her studies, determined to make the most of the opportunities she had been given. The scholarship allowed her to take advanced nursing courses, and for the first time in a long while, Mia felt like her future was full of possibility. Charles, true to his word, continued to support her in every way he could. He offered guidance, mentorship, and encouragement, always reminding her of the importance of giving back and helping others. And as Mia's confidence grew, so did her desire to make a difference. One evening, as they sat in the garden together, Mia turned to Charles and said, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about using wealth to do good. I want to give back too. There are so many people out there who are struggling, just like I was. I want to help them." Charles smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "I knew you would come to that conclusion, and I'll be here to help you every step of the way." And so, with Charles's support, Mia began to take her first steps toward creating programs that would provide healthcare and support to those in need. She opened free clinics, organized outreach programs, and dedicated her time to ensuring that others would have access to the care and opportunities that she had once needed herself. Her journey, which had started with a simple cup of coffee, had blossomed into something far greater than she could have ever imagined. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the story and share any themes or ideas you'd like to hear in future stories. Your feedback means the world to me. Thanks for watching.